So we're on to lecture 2, or the second video for lecture 1, and might be a better way to put it. We're going to review core concepts. Okay, and so if you remember, well, actually, here are the basic things that we're going to talk about today. So if you remember, core concept is just a key principle that applies to something. Specifically with us, we're going to talk about physiology, both human and exercise. So in other words, it's a big idea. And so we've got several of these that we're going to go through. And just to give you a little background, especially those of you that have not had a class from me before, a bunch of smarter people who are smarter than me got together to try and figure out, well, what are the key concepts, key principles that students need to understand to help them understand physiology. And they came up with, I think, 15 of them. I think we're only going to go through 5 or 6. So the first one is the cell membrane. And so if you think about it, cells are really complicated, and they're complex, and they're elegant, and they're beautiful, and they're wonderful, and they're amazing. And they do lots of different things. The cell membrane, it might arguably be the most important part of the cell because it determines what comes in and what doesn't come in. And as there are changes to the cell membrane when gates open and close, that lets certain things in or certain things out, and then the cell is able to do its job. Okay? And so anytime something changes within a cell, odds are something's actually happened with the cell membrane. And so this leads to, or it's kind of tied to, cell-to-cell communication. Now, if anything is to happen, one cell has to communicate with another. Okay? And so this really happens one of two ways. We either use the endocrine system or we use the nervous system. Okay? And so what happens is one cell will communicate to another, and that will cause a change or prevent a change from occurring in that second cell, which will then either cause a cascade of events or prevent a cascade of events from occurring. Okay, and this is very organized and it's very coordinated. Okay, and so if they don't talk to each other, nothing happens. So again, nervous system, endocrine system, so we can coordinate everything. So just one example of this is when a neuron tells another neuron to increase heart rate, okay, or to not increase heart rate. All right, the cardiac pacemaker cells tell the cardiac muscle cells when to contract. Next, we've got flow down gradients. Okay, now with flow, that's just the movement of stuff. Okay, whether it's ions, liquid, temperature, whatever. Okay, and this is how everything moves. If there's no gradient, there's no movement. Okay, and so we're going from one part of the system to another, and there are different kinds of flow that we discuss in physiology. So we're talking about ions and molecules moving through solution, fluid and gases going through tubes or vessels, and heat moving through objects. But in order for flow to occur, we need to have a gradient. Without a gradient, there is no flow. And so a gradient is just a difference between two areas of some specific measure. So we've got concentration, which is not the only type of gradient, but a lot of students tend to think that it is. You've got potential, or like charge, think about it in terms of charge, pressure, temperature, those sorts of things, okay? And so as we go through this, we're going to talk about these different types of gradients. Next, we've got interdependence. And with interdependence, everything relies on everything else. Okay, so we've got cells, tissues, organs, organ systems. They all interact with each other in order to maintain and sustain life. Now, there are 10 or 11 physiological systems, depending on how you classify the muscular and the skeletal. Okay, think about what would happen if you got rid of one of those systems. For example, what happens if you get rid of the nervous system? Well, odds are not a whole lot's going to happen because we're not sending signals from the brain. Okay, if you don't have the digestive system, you're not getting the nutrients broken down in a manner that we can use them. Okay, if you don't have the cardiovascular system, nothing's getting delivered. Okay, and this can go on and so forth. The only one that every once in a while will come up is reproductive system. Yes, you can survive without your reproductive system. The problem is, as soon as you die, if everybody loses their reproductive system, then the whole species is wiped out. Okay, so again, here are just some examples. Sorry, I hit one button too many. So we've got pressure differences, or pressure in the cardiovascular systems affected by the urinary and respiratory systems. Nutrients go from the digestive system to the muscles via the cardiovascular system. And the last one, and we'll actually talk about this a lot, is mass balance. And so that's just how much stuff do we have. Okay, and so even if you think outside of physiology, well, it's determined, the amount of stuff you have in a container or whatever is determined by two things. How much have you added to that container? How much have you taken out of that container? So for example, how much carbon dioxide is in your bloodstream? Well, that's determined by how much are you producing and how much are you removing. Okay? All right, and so those are the basic review of core concepts.